It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rosa Gwinn, the PFAS technical leader of AECOM. AECOM is a global company providing infrastructure consulting services, which include planning, architectural, and engineering designs, with, when needed, a focus on environmental remediation. AECOM offers a full range of services to the transportation, water, government, environmental, and energy sectors. With 30 years of experience, Rosa is a globally recognized authority in the identification and mitigation of PFAS. She recognized early on the need for companies to address the forever chemicals in drinking water, wastewater, and in the environment. Rosa is responsible for sharing management's focus on the issue and on driving the company's technical innovation and its execution. So while AECOM will recommend the best solution for a specific project, the company also has developed its own on-site and cost-effective PFAS destruction solution, which they refer to as defluoro. ACM has 132.5 million shares outstanding, a stock price of $127, market cap of $16.8 billion, and net debt of $735 million, for an enterprise value of $17.6 billion. Without further ado, I will now leave it to Rosa to bring us up to date on the overall construction market and especially on the environmental challenge. And she will have the right numbers.
Maybe. Million, billion, we're all among friends here. So thank you everyone for joining what looks to be like a little more of a feminist afternoon than the masculine morning that we had. I'm really happy to be here. I was here the first year of this symposium. I found it really stimulating. I was with my partner in crime, Gavin Shearer. He is actually the person at AECOM who's responsible for commercializing defluoro. While we work very closely together, that is really his avenue, and I don't want to get into his swim lane too much. I will say Gavin is worth listening to, and he is an amateur magician, and he's pretty good. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm not going to spill any state secrets here, and if I do, I take it all back. But, what is AECOM? I sometimes joke, like, we should just write every proposal with, pick AECOM, we're big, right? So among the consulting firms, we're architectural engineering, to be precise. We're actually a pretty large firm, among the top 2 or 3 routinely. And we're organized around 5 business lines, and Rosemarie mentioned some of those. Transportation is by far the largest. I'm in the environment business line, and there is also a water business line, and I work very closely between those two. Within transportation, we have an aviation practice, and I also work closely with those folks. But I'm not building any subway stations or, high rises in Dubai, which other more exciting people get to do. There's some, by the numbers there for you. As was mentioned, we are a $14 billion a year firm. This is showing $16 billion this year, and we're about 50,000 people. I would say our PFAS team is about 1,200 people, and it's a global team. We're doing a lot of work. Well, you can ask where we're doing it. So I wanted to share with you what some of our clients are asking for in the PFAS space, and I'm shifting a little bit away from some of the technical solutions that we've heard about, all of which are super exciting, and shifting a little bit more into the part of those I heard earlier, trillions of dollars of PFAS market that includes just thinking about how you're going to tackle this beast, right, the consulting side of things. And so I often get asked about, what's going on all around the globe for PFAS? What's going on in commerce? How are we identifying them? Zach talked about product bans. We got asked about that quite a bit, especially with what's going on in the EU. Minnesota is a super interesting case in the US. And, regs. The evolution of regs was fast and furious. I think there's sort of a little less hysteria, maybe, than was in my early part in this journey. And so that's kind of a good thing. People want to know, and we just heard from Mark and Exing, people want to know what can we do, even if there's not a reg, how can we anticipate the future? Because there is a concern about liabilities through release or ownership or you name it. And so we do talk to firms that are doing things that touch PFAS either at the front end or the back end or in the middle as they try to manage their portfolio, right? What are we going to do? We don't have enough money this week to manage the PFAS issues. Can you help us, AECOM, do sort of a long-term view of that? Pretty exciting work. And of course, property transactions have a PFAS component increasingly, and especially as we see states looking at being more active in this current situation that we're in. But what I'm going to talk about is the last thing on this slide. So if you wanted to hear about all the rest of it, you're just going to have to follow me on LinkedIn or something. I'm going to talk about treatment solutions across different media. And we've heard a lot today from vendors who have solutions at hand or in the making, and they're all things that AECOM has used or will be using or would like to use, because we've got to tackle this based on site conditions, state conditions. What do you have in the ground, above the ground, you name it. So, and just as a reminder, we are not only doing environmental evaluation. We have done some technology development. We are looking at a whole variety of issues. Stormwater is one hot topic right now, and it's one of the most challenging, probably in general, but especially for PFAS. And we've provided the services that are shown in this colorful wheel, and it's pretty much what I said in the former slide, but with more rainbow. I want to also mention that we're focused on innovating where we see some opportunities. So for example, we have a relationship where we're part of a consortium with Northwestern University and a group of universities in Israel who are looking at, excuse me, I have a cold, who are looking at developing the next generation of novel sorbents. It's pretty darn exciting. So, we like to dabble. We have, pardon me again, have been or are continuing to work on over 600 distinct PFAS projects. We've worked, as you can see, pretty much all around the globe. I heard last week we're going to have some new projects in the maritime provinces in Canada, so you'll see the creeping of the green, I guess. Some of those obscure locations like Dubai relate to the US military and sampling for AFFF. So let's talk about this environment situation, right? I'm an environmental consultant, and you need to understand your conceptual site model before you do anything. And those conceptual site models, or CSMs, they change over time. You get new data. You learn about new PFAS. You have other targets. But in general, we're looking at a release of PFAS into the environment through some sort of human activity, either manufacturing, which is shown on the right side, or maybe use of AFFF. And I want to emphasize that airborne PFAS are increasingly an issue. Apologies. So what happens when the PFAS enter into the air? They can come down in precipitation. They can enter the ground surface. They can enter groundwater. And the groundwater can make its way to drinking water or surface water bodies. You've got to manage that because you have exposure. Sorry for the unpleasantries. So let's talk a little bit about removal and treatment, because you kind of got to get at the PFAS where they are. They're not always conveniently sitting right in your coat pocket. So one of the things that the EPA has released for guidance is how you can dispose of PFAS. And they talk about, in their guidance, disposal and not so much associated with the destruction, right? So the very last row in the larger font on this slide points out that EPA guidance did provide a framework for evaluating destruction technologies. But in the immediate term, we have 3 alternatives, and you saw them on Mark's slides earlier. You've got deep well injection, no destruction in that, landfilling, no destruction in that, and thermal treatment. We think incinerators, right? And you want to make sure that all of those are permitted properly, right? This gets back to the liability question. So what do you do? Where do you start your selection? Well, you need to look at your problem. And this little grid is pretty handy, and it takes a moment for me to explain it. The left-hand side are what we call ex situ treatment. So you can get the PFAS out of the ground, and you can go treat them someplace, like where you can walk, like one of vaccine's treatments, right? Or it could come out of a manufacturing site. In situ means PFAS that are in the ground, in the storm water, in the surface water, underground, maybe even in animals, maybe even in, you name it. And what we have organized here are the technologies that exist, ex situ and in situ, that either separate or degrade PFAS. I use the word degrade because not all technologies destroy PFAS down to the mineralization, and I would argue it's probably not necessary. We don't always destroy all compounds down to nothing. That's different from non-detect, right? Just obliterate it off the planet. We do have ways to manage PFAS, and quite honestly, we have enough PFAS sitting in landfills already. It's really not that big of a deal if we're managing those PFAS to put a little bit of waste in there if it saves us money during the degradation process. You destroy 100%, uses more energy, right? So you're already expending energy or money or whatever at the landfill. So I'm not saying you ought to put everything in a landfill, but I'm saying you shouldn't be too panicked about it. And what I show here, and this is a judgment on my part, showing how commercially available these technologies are. And I know that I'm on thin ice, and I really don't want to imply that any company isn't yet commercially viable or is. It's not for me to call. I will say it's kind of a general assessment that if I'm showing something at large scale, I think of it as like the Model T. You can just pour these technologies off the assembly line, and you don't have to wait to get one. You don't have to wait to get your stuff to an incinerator. But if you're going to buy some of these other technologies, we talked about EO in the last one, and EO is electrochemical oxidation. That's actually what defluoro is. You're going to have to ask for us to make you one, right? We don't have it just sitting around and going out in the market. It's not McDonald's yet. Is that important? I think it is. I think it is. And it just is a reflection that we're moving in that direction. Where do we want to be? Microbial degradation, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could find that beast that would just kill those PFAS? So people are working on that. I think we're going to hear about it in a little bit. It's actually what happened with chlorinated solvents. We learned that natural bacteria don't mind breaking that carbon-chlorine bond for energy, and it helped us manage plumes associated with trichloroethylene or perchloroethane. So will PFAS get there? There is a furious effort right now underway to see if that can occur, and I think, you know, maybe I'll be retired, but maybe we'll get there before, you know, I'm out of the business. All right, what else did I want to say on this slide? So there is extra cost associated with ex situ management. And I wanted to point out, for example, thermal desorption. I've mentioned in the ex situ, you can perform that in situ as well. That's where you just drive the PFAS out of the ground, and then you do something with them. But if you have a big pile of construction soil, like you might, let's say, if you're building a new runway for an F-35 in Alaska, you might have 38 million cubic yards, for example, of soil above ground. You can absolutely treat that with thermal desorption to remove the PFAS, and then you manage that waste, the PFAS-laden waste, separately. So what does that look like? Now, this is a little bit of a shift, maybe more heavily focused on water or liquid wastes, a little bit less on solids. But generally speaking, you have some sort of waste stream that has PFAS in it, and it may not be very concentrated. 1 part per trillion is or 4 parts per trillion. Finding that PFAS in there is a random event, right? You're going to be putting all these electrons into your, 120 million gallons per day to find like 22 PFAS or something. It's just ridiculous, right? We're spending a lot of energy on that. So one of the things we do, though, is we take that waste, take that liquid, and we run it across a sorbent. We've talked about these earlier today, like the granular activated carbon. We talked about ion exchange resins. There's also reverse osmosis, which will will create a brine that has about 20 times concentration of PFAS, nanofiltration, and these novel sorbents, some of these things like Dexor, bicyclopure, and I think they were here the first year, but maybe not. But there are novel sorbents coming out every day, hence the term novel, right? But all of those sorbents have to be disposed of, and that brings us back to that disposal discussion about the EPA guidance, right? The disposal or degradation, right? But at the end of the day, we have clean water, and hooray for the public, because that's actually what you want, is clean water. So it ain't that easy. And maybe this comes into where AECOM makes a little bit of cabbage. But you've got to design this, and in particular for drinking water. It's easier for me to talk about that, even though I am not a drinking water design engineer by a long shot. It's not just about, what's the concentration of PFAS in water? It is about that. It's also which PFAS, short chain, long chain, we heard that discussion earlier. But what else is in the water? Zach was talking about the difficulties of managing liquids that had high suspended solids, right? That's an issue because they're going to compete with whatever sorbent you've got in there. So organic content, and then you also have to worry about hydraulics, like where's the water coming from? Is it under pressure? We saw an example earlier today of a gravity feed for a surface water treatment plant. Love seeing that, right? Totally different with groundwater. So you have to manage all of these things when you're designing these systems. And then maybe you pick your sorbent based on piloting for your specific liquid that manages all these things. But there can be pre-treatment. Oh my gosh, it's all sorts of things. And then what happens is you treat the stuff and you have to start worrying about things like, do I have enough space on my site? Can I go up high enough to put in a carbon filter, a GAC? We have a site that is stormwater, where stormwater is super dirty. You can treat that for PFAS using granular activated carbon. But it requires a lot more space, and it takes a lot longer than ion exchange resin. But ion exchange resin is very fussy. It doesn't like dirt, right? And it's expensive, but it manages the PFAS over a very short period of time. And we heard people talking about those contact times. That comes into your calculus. We've had places where they just didn't have enough footprint. And the one where we used GAC for stormwater was exactly that example. Do you have power? Are you going to be driving your GAC replacement through a little neighborhood full of angry residents? It's surprising how much goes into these designs that really doesn't seem very technical, but is in fact extremely constraining on your technical choices. And then we talked a little bit about the availability of media. So I was talking to a very large water treatment firm that is sometimes a client of ours, and sometimes we're a client of theirs. And we are working with them. And she mentioned to me that in the past few years, getting the GAC, getting the media, and getting the vessels was absolutely impossible, right? So you have to plan ahead, and you have to know that you're going to be able to get it. And if I were a vessel manufacturer, or maybe if I were an entrepreneurial, I would become a vessel manufacturer. Let me put it that way. So you've got that going on, right? You got to order your pumps, nothing I know how to do. And then at the end of this, you've got to do something with the liquid you've got. The water that you're sending the community, you're going to have to chlorinate it. You might even have to fluoridate it. I don't know. Maybe you're not allowed to. You got to repressurize it because you got to pump it to where it's got to go, and it's got to get into the distribution system. So these are, and by the way, I don't know if you heard, but all of these water treatment facilities, they already exist. They're on fixed footprint. A lot of them are in communities that just don't have any space, and they do have existing water lines and so forth, and it's not a blank slate, my friend, right? So at the end of the day, and then you got to operate, and we talked about that. We heard from Maxine that they prefer to operate their systems. Water treatment operators have to be able to manage this. And so fitting into the existing personnel is really an important factor. And I mentioned that future delivery of media. You know, we did have a site where we were driving pretty big trucks through a small neighborhood, and we weren't sure we were going to be able to get around the corners of the streets. It's sort of funny what things end up being at hand here. Okay, so none of that sounds very PFAS-y, and it's kind of not. But it is part of this trillion, $500 billion market that we're talking about. That is exactly where all these monies are needed, not just to get the PFAS out, but to get the stuff there that gets the PFAS out. So let's talk a little bit about the more ideal situation, which would be if you could separate and concentrate, right? So you turn these random little molecules of PFAS, you know, you have 1 million gallons per day of 4 parts per trillion, you treat that, and at the end of the day, you have half a teacup of PFAS concentrate. Doesn't that sound a lot easier to manage? Like you could just sit on that for a week or a month. You could put it in a container, not a leaky container. You want to have that opportunity to treat that concentrate. Why? Because remember what Mark told us? Whether you hit the full stadium with a lightning bolt or just the 6 people in the stadium, you're going to get a different outcome. The teacup is your full stadium. So we can concentrate and separate using some of the technologies that are listed here, and most of these have been mentioned before. Why do I list novel sorbents? Because you can regenerate some of these. You can pull the PFAS out, do some chemical magic, and strip the PFAS off and reuse the sorbents. That is more sustainable. It's really of higher appeal. And the same is true for regenerable ion exchange resins. And we're going to increasingly see regenerable options where they make sense, right? And not all of them have been found suitable for drinking water, but some have. But you still got this disposal step unless, and I wanted to mention foam fractionation because it's really super excellent for really dirty water like landfill leachate. This was an example where we deployed what's called a surface active foam fractionation system, and we treated at the site surface water in the summer and groundwater in the winter, right? And it pulls PFAS off just by the action of bubbling. So the PFAS like to stick to those bubbles, and they get concentrated in foam. Still, you can throw that foam away, or, and I think this is where I'm heading, although maybe my bubbles were moving, I don't know. If you put it all together, this is where you plunk in your degradation step, right? So you get that teacup, you get that concentrated PFAS waste, you can toss it away, or you can add some energy, you're not going to do it for free, and you can use different technologies to degrade and or wholly destroy those PFAS. You may have some need for polishing, you may have some post-treatment need, you may have entirely non-hazardous byproducts that you can discard. We've heard people talk about that today. It just depends on how much money you want to put into that, and you want to optimize the situation, right? You're not going to keep pumping energy when you don't get a lot of return. So what's out there? And I'm listing a few out there that we've had some experience with, like incineration, of course, that's commercially out there. You can use it. There's been some black eyes on commercialization. And then, I'm sorry, incineration, I can talk about that. There's SQO, which we heard about this morning. Electrochemical oxidation, which Mark just spoke about a few minutes ago. Plasma is also a technology that destroys PFAS. Senolysis is a little bit less far along. It has some interesting opportunities surrounding it. Oh, and then I tossed in here mechanochemical degradation because ball milling is a really interesting technology that is coming forth primarily for solids, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned ball milling. We think of adding energy to a system to destroy the carbon-fluorine bond. You can do that through mechanochemical activity. You add, I mean, think, it's like hit something with a hammer. Are you adding energy? Yes, you are, right? So it's a very promising technology, and there's a lot of work being done with a group that I think is just really onto some good stuff. So then you've got to ask yourself the question, how am I going to make this work for my problem? Maybe I'm a manufacturer of, widgets, and I have a bunch of widget factories, and they're in all different places. And if I need to destroy my PFAS or dispose of my PFAS-laden waste, I have to make the calculation, hey, am I going to just, drive this to the nearest incinerator, or is there a landfill that's closer by? And you're going to make an economic decision based on that. But we also heard that there's such a thing as mobile units, and you might want to invoke something that's called a milk run, right? You just go from place to place to place, and you treat that teacup. You have the equipment full time, right? But you only use it part-time at each one of your locations. Those are all possibilities. I don't think I'm pushing anybody's intellectual boundaries by mentioning these very simple concepts, but I think sometimes they're lost because we think, oh, PFAS are so hard. By the way, I wanted to say, if you say forever chemicals at AECOM, you're off the team. We don't use those words because they ain't. It invokes fear and worry, and I think it's worth avoiding. So let's just kind of leave that little bit out there. And I think that brings me to the end here. This is everything I just said, but in green arrows with gold ellipses, right? You've got to think about the ins and outs, the restraints, the constraints, the benefits, the cost, and you're going to get your solution for your site. And that's AECOM stock and trade. We may have developed a technology that can destroy PFAS, but we are not married to that technology. We will always be technology agnostic. We will pick the best combination using the best vendor situation for the problem at hand. And that's why it's so important for me to come to sessions like this, because then I get to talk to people who are coming up with new ideas that we can bring to our clients. So then I think I can wrap up just talking a little bit about where we think the business is going to go. I had to make up a number here, 15% growth on PFAS year over year. It's really much more from a quarter to 1 quarter. It may go up and down, 50% up, 11% up. It's a little bit of a wag. It is growing. It's still growing. The main thing that's happening in the market is there's some shifting to the right. Scheduling is moving to the right. It doesn't make it any less of a market. It just changes how we're going to tackle it, when, what the scope, what the scale, and what the timing are. Okay, I will leave it at that. I kept thinking I was done.
Well, Rosa, thank you very, very much for, as usual, a very exciting presentation. There is no time for questions unless there is one quick one from the audience. Okay, there is one. Please wait for the microphone.
Dr. Gwinn, it's so great to listen to your presentation. I have a pre-question before my real question. The pre-question is how long has PFAS being treated for? Like people got aware of, we need to do something about the situation.
So
Yes.
we've been doing work on the PFAS question for about 21 years at
Yes, that's
AECOM.
okay.
The first drinking water system we installed 14 years ago, right? And drinking water was the driver, and it's still operating. So I don't know if we're typical, but that's my...
Yeah, but you're the leader. AECOM is the leader in this
Well,
area, right?
if you
More or
ask
less.
me and my
Yes.
boss asks me, that's
Yes.
what I say for sure.
Yes. So the real question is, has there been, because of a previous presenters mentioned, that there has been a long-term contracts and whatnot, et cetera, to build it and so on and so forth. Has there been any breakthroughs? Is that it's hard to plan? As a, whenever people say 5-year plan, it, just give me an alert.
Well, that's a really hard question, because I think what I'll say is there is no silver bullet, so we haven't had a breakthrough that shortens how people can solve their PFAS issues.
Yes.
There's not a one-size-fits-all kind of, hey, this is always going to work.
Mm-hmm.
There is...
Or significant improvement.
Well, I mean, I think when I'm talking about, at the beginning part, when I was talking about portfolios, these are folks who are planning for what's going to happen, how much they're going to have to spend, and they need to plan that year over year, right? So there is actually a stressor if that's accelerated. Just going to say for the record.
Yeah.
Right? You want it to be better, faster, and cheaper, right? But
well, in the tech world, that has happened. It's really hard to plan. Like when Apple came out, it wasn't planned, actually.
Yeah.
I am sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
but we are going to have to move on, and feel free, please, to talk to Dr. Gwinn as she walks out.
Tony Bancroft and Timothy Winter, CFA, are portfolio managers. Wayne Pinsent, CFA, is Director of Research and Research Analyst, and Rosemarie Morbelli, CFA, and Dr. Rebecca Stern, PhD, are Research Analysts at Gabelli Funds. The above webcast is a recording from the 3rd Annual PFAS Symposium, which occurred on September 17, 2025. GAMCO is providing these links as a matter of general information. We do not intend for these links to be a complete description of any security or company, nor is it a research report with respect to any of the companies mentioned herein. As of June 30, 2025, affiliates of GAMCO Investors Incorporated beneficially owned 1.1% of Minerals Technologies and less than 1% of all other companies mentioned. The analysts' views are subject to change at any time based on market and other conditions. The information in this posting represents the opinions of the analyst and is not intended to be a forecast of future events, a guarantee of future results, or investment advice. Views expressed are those of the analyst and may differ from those of other GAMCO officers, analysts, other employees, or of the firm as a whole. Because the investment personnel at GAMCO and our affiliates make individual investment decisions with respect to the client accounts that they manage, these accounts may have transactions inconsistent with the information contained in this posting. Certain GAMCO personnel may know the substance of the posting prior to its posting. This webcast is not an offer to sell any security, nor is it a solicitation of an offer to buy any security. Stocks are subject to market, economic, and business risks that cause their prices to fluctuate. When you sell shares, they may be worth less than what you paid for them. For more information, a prospectus, or summary prospectus, visit our website at www.gabelli.com or call 800 Gabelli 800 422 3554 914 921 5100 fax 914 921 5118 info@gabelli.com